Welcome to the Whiskey Politics Podcast. I'm Dave Sussman, Ricochet, and I'm delighted and very pleased to have Mr. Bill Kristol, one of America's best known and most respected political commentators, editor of the Weekly Standard. Thank you very much, and here we are.
It's very kind of you. You obviously had a lot of whiskey before deciding on that most respected part. But that's good.
I think after the last 8 years, we've had to have a lot of whiskey to get through the politics.
That is for sure. Who knows? Maybe the next 8 years too, if we can be honest.
Maybe. Well, we are currently right now on the Weekly Standard cruise, which you have put together, and it's a delight to be here and meet the team at Weekly Standard as well as many of the fans. I'd like to jump right into politics with you, and one of the things that has been a constant theme at Ricochet, which is, as you know, is a right-of-center but very civil website, yes. Is the back and forth between the never-Trumpers and the Trumpers over the past 15 months. And so, obviously, some things that have been discussed over the past few days here at the Weekly Standard Cruise. What would you say to those individuals who wonder, from the perspective of Weekly Standard's perspective, of Trump and the future, and whether or not you believe that he has the ability to achieve some of the goals, and what your hopes for his successes are?
I'm hopeful. I mean, I think the basic attitude, one of the cruisers said this to me right at the beginning, is that, we just should move on. I mean, we're not going to know for quite a while who was right? I mean, the fact that he's had a pretty good, I think, first 3 or 4 weeks as president-elect does not prove he'll be a successful president. It doesn't prove what his economic policies are going to be. It doesn't prove what his foreign policies are going to be and whether they're going to be successful. So it's awfully premature to make a judgment about Donald Trump. I do think I've been pleasantly surprised by his appointments, almost all of them, as president-elect. And I've got to say, even I did not want Hillary. I was never Hillary as well as never Trump. But even I underestimated just what a feeling of relief it was going to be, that it was, when Hillary Clinton lost. Ramesh Ponnuru, a friend of all of ours from National Review, said a couple of months before the election, it's going to be a tough night because someone's going to win that we don't have much confidence in should be president. But the really good news is someone's going to lose who we don't want to be president. And Hillary Clinton's loss was a boost to the spirit, honestly, and not just out of some petty, I don't like her or whatever, or she didn't deserve to be president. That happens to be true as well. But I really think it is a chance for the country to recover from the Obama years and to move ahead. And maybe Donald Trump's sort of unorthodox personality and character to be president and his unorthodox form of conservatism. Sometimes those things work a little better than maybe more stick in the mud types like me think. So I'm very open-minded about a Trump presidency. My advice to conservatives is, I don't know if it's trust but verify or distrust but verify.
Following Ronald Reagan.
You're following Ronald Reagan. But don't, because he won a narrow electoral college victory, don't assume that everything he's doing is an act of genius. Let's keep our wits about us and say, well, that policy seems sensible. That one, are you sure that's a good idea? But people like me, who are very distrustful of Trump, shouldn't assume that he may not end up being a pretty good president.
One of the things that has been, and I'd like to get to your thoughts on the cabinet picks and what he's done since the election, but one of the things that has been a trend and something that I'm starting to read in Weekly Standard and other publications is that Trump didn't happen in a vacuum, that this was part of a global trend, maybe against globalism. Monday, just this last Monday, we woke up and found out that Prime Minister Renzi of Italy has basically quit. He's walking away. His vote did not pass where they wanted to amend the constitution in Italy. Obviously, after Brexit, which was a surprise to everybody, is this in a sense, a big, a reaction to globalism, to the elitism that we see around the world?
I think to some degree, but I think a lot of it in the American case was a reaction to Obama. And incidentally, it's not as if, Republicans have been close in the last few elections. And again, Republicans lost 2 Senate seats and 6 House seats in this election. It's not as if, Republicans have just been nowhere and then suddenly came to everywhere, right? They basically had the similar performance to 4 years ago, except Trump turned out to be a better candidate than Romney, or Hillary turned out to be a worse candidate than Obama. In fact, if you look at the numbers, Trump's total vote is pretty close to Romney's. Hillary's vote drops off, I think, by 8 or 9 million from Barack Obama's. That's not to minimize Trump's victory. It is to say that let's not overinterpret it either. Yeah, there's a reaction against globalism, against cosmopolitan elites, against all that stuff. Some of that reaction is much of that reaction is understandable. Some of it is healthy. Some of it isn't healthy, though. We shouldn't. I'm not I'm not against every aspect. We're sitting here on a cruise ship, right? We're not only in the United States. I think it's owned by it's called Holland America. I don't know who owns it exactly, but I don't think it's under an American flag.
I think it was a French flag on the front.
Was it? I honestly don't know where it's registered. There are people from all nationalities on this ship. Is that a bad thing? I mean, do we really want to go back somehow to a world where, it's hard to visit another country or for people to visit us, and where we don't import a lot of excellent coffee from Kenya and, cheese from France and all these things? I don't mean to be glib about it. I mean, there are some real advantages to international commerce, to international organizations, even not the ones we don't like, perhaps, like the UN, but certain others have certainly kept the peace. That's not a little thing. So I think there's so much hostility to some of the international elites and some of their projects, and I'm with the hostility on that one shouldn't throw out the baby with the bathwater. We're not in favor. I'm not in favor of this kind of xenophobic, inward-looking America that's hostile to foreigners, that has no immigrants, that doesn't think we have any world responsibilities.
What was your opinion of the whole hullabaloo about Taiwan and China this week with Trump?
I thought that was good. I thought in the sense that there's a very artificial policy of never sort of acknowledging almost Taiwan's existence. It's a country, I've been there a couple of times, of 25 million people. It's a free and democratic country. We have a treaty with them, or formally, I'm not sure it's a treaty, but we have obligations to them, and we should try to help them. We should help them preserve their independence from China unless they wish to join mainland China. So I was glad that Trump broke some of those diplomatic protocols. Look, this is where someone like Trump ignoring the foreign policy establishment can be a good thing. On the other hand, one also doesn't want to be I'm pretty hawkish, and I've been pretty hawkish on China. But when it is a huge country, we have a complicated relationship with them. You don't want to just be rash in dealing with a country like that. I don't think anyone. So that mixture of boldness and prudence, I think, is what we hope for. And I've got to say, as president-elect, I think Trump has shown a pretty good balance of that so far.
Continuing on international issues, this is all happening at the same time. Just if you turn on CNN the last week, they have been literally celebrating the free healthcare, education, and low mortality rates of infants in Cuba. And what you're not hearing is, if anything, maybe he was a controversial leader, but the true totalitarianism, the fascism of Fidel Castro. Is that saying more about our state as far as the media today? And are we in danger of not educating our youth when it comes to situations? Where does that come from?
Well, but there's been terrible left-wing liberal apologists for Castro since the beginning. One of the reasons he came to power is that the New York Times reporters were so in love with him, and the liberal elites here were in love with him. And he's always been excused for terrible violations of human rights, torture, obviously no democracy or freedom in Cuba. I think this is a huge opportunity. I do think dictatorships, especially more totalitarian-type dictatorships, have trouble when their leader dies, even a leader who's been out of power a little bit, but when their symbolic founder dies, that transition is not so easy to pull off. And this is a moment where, we don't have to invade or anything like that, but with the proper use of pressure, of sticks and carrots, relieving sanctions only if Cuba liberalizes internally, with some religious freedom, some freedom of the press, you could really encourage change in Cuba in a way that I think you could have a free and democratic Cuba in 2 or 3 or 4 years. It'd be great. And Trump, I'd say to his credit, Trump's a guy who beats up Bush. He's not interested in all this democracy, nation-building stuff. He's a Fortress America guy. His statement on Cuba was very good, though. It was indistinguishable from what George W. Bush's or Ronald Reagan's or John McCain's would have been, or McCain's case was, actually. And that encouraged me, that Trump does believe that we have some responsibility to promote freedom and democracy, not by invading, perhaps, but certainly by using pressure, sanctions, and where we have a chance to use them, as we have in the case of Cuba. Not Obama's policy, it's just relieving all the pressure in return for nothing. So I actually was struck by the reactions to Castro's death on the left and the right. We have a very good piece by Elliot Abrams, whom you know, I think, who had a real pushback against the whitewashing of what Castro did. It's terrible. But you've gone this cruise, we're not far from Cuba right here.
Right.
And it's terrible that for 50 years these people have been living in conditions that are way below what they should be, and certainly without the basic freedoms that we take for granted, and even their neighbors here take for granted, for all the problems of Central America, So I really hope that would be a great thing if Trump sort of has in mind Cuba as a possible achievement of his administration.
Do you believe the media has a responsibility to educate people on that? Because there is a leftism, a populism that comes out of the media, which makes Cuba sound like a very romantic ideal.
Well, we have to counter that, and the media, I could say the media has a responsibility, but I don't think the New York Times is going to take my guidance as to what they're doing. But that's why the Weekly Standard exists, and that's why Ricochet exists.
Right.
And the good news about the modern media environment and the internet, it's got its downsides too, with fake news and all that. But the good news is that we can get our story out just like they can get their story out. And people have become properly suspicious of the mainstream media on a lot of these issues. And I don't know if, I worry about the education system, I worry about young people, but there are an awful lot of young people too who understand what damage Castro did, I think, or at least I hope.
Well, further to that, let's further talk about messaging, because we're obviously going to have Trump inaugurated here next month, and one of the first few things that many conservatives are hoping for, and Trump has certainly alluded to, is to repeal and replace Obamacare, and it's something that I believe personally that as people opened up their health care bills for 2017, it stimulated a tremendous amount of support for the conservative message in October and November. Paul Krugman and the New York Times and his ilk are suggesting that we want to basically kick everybody off the insurance rolls, and that there's going to be people in the streets dying, and all of the horrible negativity and the nightmarish scenarios. How do you counterbalance that with something that is going to be more free markets, open states, maybe health savings accounts, and educate people who are otherwise, quite frankly, they don't follow what you and I are talking about?
Well, we need to do a better job. We need to do a good job of explaining what the replacement's going to be. We've written a lot about that in the Weekly Standard. I think there are good conservative replacements that also make health insurance more affordable for people who are in the individual market, who don't have it provided by their by the corporation of which they work or the business of which they work. Some of whom are lower income and could use some help, a tax credit. We've written actually a lot about that. The one thing I would say to my fellow conservatives is, we're right to be concerned about messaging, we're right to be concerned about all, but, results matter. Ronald Reagan lost a lot of battles in 1981, 82 about his economic message. The media was more biased then. At the end of the day, if you're growing 6-7% in 1984, they can say whatever they want. People aren't idiots. They look around and they see jobs are being created, their incomes are going up, the stock market's going up. And so forth. They see the world safer. They see we don't have a nuclear war in the case of Reagan, and that in fact the Soviet Union is the one that's under pressure and is beginning to change. I think the same will be true of Trump. The latest editorial I wrote is, I think, called "Governing Matters Most," and I think the key here is to get the policies right and get them implemented and execute them well. One of the things that damaged Obamacare was not you and me and Jeff Anderson and a lot of Yuval Levin and a lot of conservative scholars saying, "Hey, this thing doesn't work so well with that." It's what you said. It's the actual premiums showed up, and people said, geez, 38% increase, or even the original website fiasco, right? So I think people need to focus on people on the conservative side who are good, who know a lot about these policies, and helping make sure that we pass good policies and that we implement them well. And I think at that point, there's a limit to how much you can spend things. People are going to look around. If the world is safer, if ISIS is in retreat, if the U.S. is strong, if our military is built up, if the economy is growing, people will say, okay, the media, Paul Krugman said whatever he said, but the fact is, these are the facts on the ground. Reality does matter a lot.
Going back to Trump real briefly here, you wrote a recent article. You compared possibly the future Trump administration to the administration of Warren G. Harding.
It was kind of a little bit of a little bit to provoke people, to make them think. So Harding is generally thought to have been a fairly sort of lightweight president. He had some scandals. He had a mistress. He only lived a couple of years, actually, and died in office. I hope that doesn't happen, obviously, to anyone else, any other president. But it's interesting. I hadn't really thought much about it, and then I went back and looked at a tiny bit of history. The Harding administration was not a bad administration, though. We recovered very quickly from a very steep recession at the end of World War I. His Secretary of State, Charles Evans Hughes, within the limits of what was possible in the early 1920s, did some pretty good things for world order. Harding made some very good Supreme Court appointments, distinguished people. Andrew Mellon, as Secretary of the Treasury, is widely considered one of the great secretaries of the Treasury of the last 100 years, maybe ever. Now, there were other parts of the government that went off the rails a little bit, and there were some scandals and stuff. So my point is, you can have a pretty successful administration, even with a president who's a little impetuous, flaky, not quite what someone like me would want, maybe in every respect. And I sort of think that might be what would happen with Trump. He'll frustrate someone like me who wants more consistency and stability and dignity in the Oval Office. He'll be Trump, and he is not going to change much probably from what he's been. Doesn't mean you can't have an effective administration, and this is and the context of that editorial especially was his cabinet picks. If he gives them a lot of authority, if he makes strong picks, and I think he has mostly, you can end up with good policies, good Supreme Court nominations, good deregulatory efforts, good tax reform. Even if Donald Trump is tweeting out some silly things or saying some things that I kind of prefer an American president didn't say.
You, the Weekly Standard team, many other conservative publications, friends of ours, were all never-Trumpers. You were maybe the de facto never-Trumper in the eyes of many. But since the election, have been very magnanimous. Let me just ask you, from a humanistic standpoint, what was that 15 months like for you personally?
Honestly, it wasn't so bad for me. I think some of my friends, some other people had more in the way of personal assaults. I've been in Washington for a while, and I was in government. I'm an alleged warmonger at the time of Iraq, so I'm kind of used to all these assaults, and I never look at my notifications on Twitter. That's a very good piece of advice I got from one of my young colleagues, Daniel Halper, so I have no idea what people are saying most of the time, so that's good, and it wasn't that tough. And I think it's good for the conservative movement to have some, to learn to live with internal disagreement. It's not obvious what exactly the right tax plan is. It's not. There are interesting debates on Obamacare replacements. There are interesting debates on foreign policy. There are interesting debates in just judging Trump or Rubio or Cruz. And if you're a serious movement, you've got to learn to accept that not everyone's going to agree on everything all the time. Now, Trump was a little bit more of a flashpoint because he was the Republican nominee, and people like me were never Trump. But never Trump was a matter of my decision, of my judgment of who I could and couldn't vote for. Now that he's president-elect of the United States and going to be president of the United States, and has putting together a pretty cabinet of which I respect, I certainly wish him well, and I actually think I'm somewhat encouraged. And I think you'll see the magazine praising him where he deserves to be praised and supported, encouraging him to do certain things, maybe suggesting modifications to certain things he'll do, maybe in a few cases opposing things he'll do if we think they're mistaken and bad for the country. I think it could be a good moment for the conservative movement to get a little bit beyond either cheerleading. Some of us fell into that a little bit probably with Bush. Partly was the attack on him was so extreme and vitriolic that you almost felt you had an obligation to defend, and undeserved, right? Or with Obama, where again it's pretty easy to, he did deserve to be criticized, so it's pretty easy to just criticize everything, and you were mostly right if you did so there wasn't a great risk. But in a way with Trump, it'll be maybe a test of the maturity of the conservative movement, of criticizing at times, praising a fair amount of the time, supporting, encouraging, and sort of discriminating between different policies and different things he does.
Well, whether it's on Weekly Standard or on your television shows on Sunday morning, we look forward to hearing, at least for the next 4 years, your thoughts, and want to thank you for your time.
I appreciate it.
Mr. Bill Kristol,
thanks
thank you
for
very
coming
much.
on the cruise.
Like.